years old. I'm originally from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I would say I probably identify with being Eritrean specifically. I would identify with being Habesha, but I do think that sometimes I get really iffy about using that word on just like Eritreans more generally, just because, I don't know, I recently had a conversation with someone and they were just like, not all of the tribes are underneath that umbrella, and we all just automatically get affiliated with y'all because of the way that people just use it really generally with anybody who's Ethiopian or Eritrean. Sometimes I'm just like, are you Eritrean? Because I feel like that has a lot more expansive connection, I guess.
Would you say, like, you often use this word, or like, how have you used it in the past?
I would definitely say I often use this word because it's a word I feel comfortable describing myself, yeah. I think I tend to use it sometimes if I want to have people who are not Eritrean, but like we have like similar cultural values. Like I try to use it as like a connecting point to kind of like be able to like see each other's humanity in this way, like from a historical perspective, I guess.
Why do you feel comfortable identifying with the word?
It's just a word that's always been in my home. And I think sometimes it also helps because even though like Eritrea and Ethiopia separated, we have like a deeply connected history. And so some of the things that are referenced as like Ethiopian New Year or Ethiopian Christmas, things like that, my parents would always be like, no, that's not just theirs. Like this is a Habesha Christmas, this is, all this stuff. So like when we celebrate things that other people would consider to be like Ethiopian, I would kind of be able to at least like know to myself, like actually at one point it makes sense why I'm celebrating these things and I don't have to like teach you.
Do you remember the first time where you heard the word?
Yeah, like in my house. All the Habeshas are going to be there. I think it's also a little bit different just because in Grand Rapids, it's not like a lot of other cities that have like a huge Ethiopian community, huge Somalian community, huge Eritrean. It's like the big community of Africans that like I would say are like really Eritreans. Like we have a very organized community there. Like one family came and then like 10 families came and then 35.
Do you have any idea like the historical origins of the word?
I've heard many stories, but I wouldn't say I know anything that's like concrete that I've like researched particularly around that term.
You don't have any
inklings?
Yes.
I've heard that it like was formerly used as like a term to describe like slave or like something like that, but from like when we were colonized by the Arabs. And I don't know, I just feel like as a black person, as a queer person, there's every reclaimed term that we get to have, and guess what? Now they call on it because they want to date a Habesha girl, or they want to, like have one be featured in their campaign, or blah, blah, blah. Regardless of how it came about, if terms change and their value, the community's value on them changes, so fucking what, fuck that history. I know that like it's a thing where people are like want to change language frequently, and I think a word can have an awful evil meaning originally, but if me and mine figure out a way to feel powerful within it, then I get to also decide if we want to keep it. You can sort your own goat.
I love that, because I think that's the whole point of this project, is that like language matters, and we need to like really look at why we're using certain language, and we need to understand the implications of it. But at the same time, I think we all know the reason we use this word is because it comes with community. Mm-hmm. You are very comfortable, clearly, and like, very proud to be Habesha, but then when it comes to like introducing yourself or the way you speak about yourself, like how do you how do you negotiate when you use Eritrean versus Habesha?
Probably with friends who have political identities that can sometimes have tension with mine.
So you use it as an agitator?
No, I think I use it as like a point of distinction, or sometimes as a clarifying answer to someone's question. Because I think there are times where I like will share space with like other Ethiopians who are queer, and we feel a lot of connection, even though there are some like distinctive things between us, right? And there's also this like sometimes elephant in the room history that we kind of make the decision to either hash out or just kind of like recognize like this is where we are now. So sometimes it's like, yeah, no, this is my homegirl, she's also Habesha. And I think a lot of times maybe I almost use Habesha like when I'm more like familiar or more familial with someone. I mean that like if somebody was like, oh, like, are you Habesha? I'm like, yeah, I'm Eritrean. The clarifying answer to your question. If I'm like, I don't know if you identify as Ethiopian or Eritrean, or it could also be somebody who identifies as Tagaru, right? Like, because some people also are having new feelings around whether or not they identify as Ethiopian or not. So like, I will say like, yes, I am a part of this larger community. However, here are some things that I think that will cause possibly conversation later on in our friendship or relationship.
Like every single Eritrean, every recording, if you ask me, are you Habesha? Yeah, I'm Eritrean.
And did.
So I think it's interesting. I think Eritreans have like negotiated how they navigate that space because they're like, I'm going to claim this because yes, we will acknowledge the similarities, but don't get it twisted.
Because I think there's also like, we know there's jokes about each other in both of our communities. We know that there's like anger and rage and like what I would argue is cyclical trauma. Why are we going to play about it? Like that's my feeling. And I think sometimes like Ethiopians will like give Habesha as like the olive branch. And I think for them they're just like, we don't even think about it. It's not that deep. I'm like, girl, stop lying. And I know this because I'm not always the one who initiates those conversations. They know why we can't be united. If they don't, then that means they also just don't know their own country's history most of the time. I think it might be difficult for people who also experience oppression within this country to like not realize how they might be coming from like an imperial place. Like being an Amhara Ethiopian, like you absolutely will experience privilege in a different way. Like your whole culture, like your tribe's culture is what's centralized in many places in Ethiopia.
With your identity with this term, how does that interact with your identity as a Black American?
It made it very complicated growing up, especially because me and my sister have like very different experiences as like Black women in America. She's like in a lot of ways like typically what people think of when they think of like Habesha women, right? Like soft hair, very thin, her skin's lighter than mine. So I think when she was in high school, she really gravitated towards like white students. Whereas like a lot of my experience growing up, when I tried to be a part of white communities because we were in a predominantly white area, it was like very negative until more Black women started to come into my life. It made it very complicated because I think in the beginning our parents felt like Black Americans had told them that they were not Black Americans. And so, yeah, because my dad had come here in the 70s and he was like, that was what they told me. So that's what I'm teaching you, right? Like you're an African who lives in America. You're not African American. But I also feel like I do not identify with a lot of the things that are a part of our culture sometimes. And I think that's because I grew up here. And I grew up around like Black American women who are like Black Americans, like African Americans. Even then, that's like terms that are changing a lot too.
You feel like your family's reaction was because they were rejected, not because they had any animosity toward the community?
I think because my dad actually came to New York when he first came here with like legal working migrant papers. Then the war broke out. All of a sudden he starts getting letters being like, don't come back home. It's insane over here. And so he actually experienced a lot of like solidarity in the beginning when he was here during the 70s, because it was also like the Black Panther Party. Like there was like a lot of connection in that sense. After he went, I think the next place he went to was like Philly and then like Boston. He experienced like a lot of anger, I guess, towards him, just from like Americans more generally, in a way that was like xenophobic. That was, I think, when he kind of started to like pick up on it more. I love my mother down, but I think she had a much more sensationalized view of America, just generally, and because of like media, she also had a much more sensationalized view of Black Americans here. I think her views and perceptions changed a lot because of the fact that I just like could not really find community in in white people.
Oh my god. Okay, on that note, how do you think this word kind of like positions you as it relates to other Africans?
Oh, I sometimes feel like people see us as like real uppity, like, and I feel like that's Ethiopia's fault. No, it's also very much Isiasa Forki's fault. But I think that there is kind of, like, I think just generally it can be, and I think sometimes for valid reason, like a frustration with us, and like how we are as like a culture. Like, we're not very inviting. Like, we're very like insular. And I think that for those of us who are kind of just like, yes, let's meet people, da da da, you know, like, I think a lot of times that might be because, again, we have like different experiences as like Black Americans here. I think there's other cultures who experience where you have like a wide range of like tones within that culture. And so they might have very different experiences with like Blackness and like racism and like a desire to want to like learn history as opposed to identify with like mythology of what history that they've created or envisioned. I think what I'm saying is that like it also makes sense that sometimes if I like meet girls who are like Ugandan, like literally again within technically what is like all like our region, she'll be like, oh, like you think I'm East African too? Anytime somebody thinks of an East African, they're not looking at somebody like me, and I'm like, and like, is she wrong? You know what I'm saying? Like, we take up a lot of space, and it's because like, and it's also again like I think it's Eritreans by proxy, but I think it's really Ethiopians, because like there's the idea that they like were never colonized and da-da-da, and I think that like sometimes in terms of how Black Americans here like perceive us and perceive other Africans, sometimes it's in relation to like things that, I don't know, like that make you famous as a country, right? Like Nigerian, Ghana, Afrobeat, like music, culture, like South Africa, same thing. I think with like Ethiopia, their big thing is that they've always been like a independent nation. Texturism and colorism is like really rampant in our community, right? I think that's also, like I said, why some of us have very different experiences with Blackness here. And I think sometimes that's also why some Eritreans really buy into like meritocracy. Eritrean Ethiopians like just like really buy into that sometimes in a way that I wonder if other like African diaspora kids feel similarly. Like, I don't know if a Nigerian is like gonna be like a Trump supporter in a way that I think that there's like some Eritreans whose parents like migrated here, they made a small business, da 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 da. They might buy into that.
I feel like with the Habesha texturism and colorism, it's interesting because we're not striving toward whiteness. I've heard like when you see like someone with green eyes in Eritrea, you call them Demamu. Right? It's just interesting that we have such a specific brand of like colorism and texturism. It's like you have to be this specific shade, this specific eye color, this specific hair.
Because I think they also very much don't like white culture. Not necessarily like quote unquote the concepts of freedom, right? Like, I'm not talking about that, but like white kids talk crazy to their parents. There's like a level of individualism that exists here that is not what they want back home. And so I think it can be weird and complicated for them because I think they literally will sometimes just see, they're like, if you're this shade, things are going to be this much harder for you. I remember my mom said that her mother used to tell her like, oh, like, Chocolina Baria, like hair of the slave, you know? She would like be like doing my mother's hair and be like, oh, your hair is so... It's like when people say she got bad hair, basically. And so my mom was like, you got hair like mine. I was like, I'm gonna take that for what you're saying.
You've also been back home. Did you hear the word Habesha used back home?
There wasn't like a need to like identify others because we were all the same. Like the only time people maybe would even reference like people outside of folks who they assumed were just Tigrinya, where like when we were going to like different villages, like if we were going to Keren or something like that, then they would be like, oh, some of these people are this, like they might be like Bilen, da-da, stuff like that.
And did you feel like you experienced or saw colorism or texturism when you were back home? Not just like personal experiences, but also like media or like billboards.
That's what I think I was gonna really say, is that they still like try and get people to use like creams and stuff.
Like bleach.
Yeah. Like I remember when I was home, they were like, we have to send someone back with her hair nice. And they were like, okay, well, it's too expensive to get our hair straightened, so let's braid it. You know what I mean? Like, that was what was perceived as, like, the nice thing. Like, we need to have it so that way it's put away, it's done. Also, girls who have, like, loose curl afros are, like, encouraged to wear their hair out, but girls who have, like, afros like mine, they're normally just like, well, why don't you braid it? Well, why don't you straighten it? We very much operated under, like, a hierarchy that also was, like, a monarchy, right? Like, with the emperors and things like that. At one point, I would say that that also probably contributed to it as well. Like, people who literally had the time to stay indoors and not be out in the sweltering sun. People who had the time to have their hair look a certain way. Also, like, regionally, at least in Eritrea, like, I would say some of it has to do with colonialism. Because we've also just exchanged hands a lot. And there are things that we, like, have distaste for, but there's things that also were accumulated, like, I would say that were acclimated into our culture. Like, there's a lot of Habeshas with Italian names. And a lot of those light-skinned, lighter ones with those Italian names are TV anchors. One thing about Eritreans is that we're really fucking stubborn, and we very much are fundamentalists in the way we perceive tradition. And I think using the term fundamentalist is important because it's like we're very rigid in terms of change. So I think that can also contribute as to, like, why there's no desire for a change in language, because we're not a culture to be like, this hurts certain people, we shouldn't change it. We're like, well, those people should just buck the fuck up, huh? In fact, I think that was, like, a way for my parents to kind of be like, this is not restrictively theirs. They do not get to own this because they were the former, like, regional colonizer. Like, they don't get to keep this just because we've, like, demarcated our lines. This belongs to us too. And then they'll use things like Habesha because they're like, you're not Ethiopian. You will not call yourself Ethiopian. This is not Ethiopian New Year. This is Habesha New Year.
So it's like a way to, like, reclaim, I guess, like, a cultural connection with people you do feel connected to, but, like, you're just, like, distinctly not.
Who, like, have caused you harm. I think we can also explicitly state that. Feature-wise, sure, I might be connected to somebody who's, like, Somalian, but, like, I'm also not that in a lot of ways that feel very distinctive to, like, how I've grown up. I think there's some ways that, like, we are connected, but I think those are ways that, like, many African countries are connected, right? Like, if you're a daughter, these are the things that are expected of you. The fact that a lot of the people I'm perceiving right now are, like, Orthodox Christian, that's, like, a huge aspect of the culture that connects Eritrea and Ethiopia, or at least, like, people who are Habesha. And I think that also is, like, a big reason why for a long time we, like, were seen as different within the region.
Because of Orthodox Christianity?
Well, just because, like, we kind of saw that as, like, our indigenous Christianity, or as our indigenous religion.
That's a great point. I think no one's also explicitly stated why Christianity is, like, at the core of this culture.
While, of course, like, some of the oldest mosques and stuff are also within where we are, that was also brought about through a colonial rule. That's just...
You said my 2 cents.
I don't feel discomfort with that term, but I think I feel very comfortable within my Eritrean community.
We talked a bit about, obviously, how the word positions your identity, but then in terms of just, like, how you discuss, like, the Black experience and Pan-Africanism, like, issues relating to both the future of, like, basically the future of our people, both at home and the diaspora. Like, do you feel like you have productive and supportive conversations with your African peers? Do you feel like there's any tension or animosity, apprehension due to anything related to our culture?
I think I would say that for the most part I do. Honestly, when I meet other Africans, it's kind of more, the thing that we bond over isn't necessarily, like, our cultural connection so much as, like, the same sense of, like, sometimes experiencing the things that we've had as, like, being isolated in a way. We both, like, could talk about, like, how, like, when we were growing up, we could only have friends who are also other people within our same community. Like, we talked about, like, going to school smelling like different foods that our parents were cooking the night before, like, things like that. I don't think it was necessarily, like, conversations surrounding, like, what was happening in our home countries all the time.
You were, like, accepted within African circles, or was your African identity ever questioned or called out in any way?
Mine wasn't, but I had a cousin who's light-skinned, and they were like, y'all are not even Black, y'all are Arab. And I was like, I literally looked at her, I was like, girl, what? And she was like, okay, you know I'm not talking about you. And I was like, Wow, being dark skin worked for me today. I mean, I have like yellow undertones, sure, but I also have red undertones too. I think it's just like in general, like people see me and they clock me as a black girl.
Yeah.
And they're not gonna look at me and be like, is she mixed? No, that's never once happened to me in my life. And it's never going to happen to me in my life. But I think that there's times where some of my family members, it has been that. It's like very clear that the reason why this narrative is existing is because of colorism and like colorism they've received, and also maybe the way colorism was like weaponized. The same way that light-skinned girls in every community can like be really like awful. I think sometimes there are Eritreans who like see themselves as like the light-skinned girls of Africa. And it's also just crazy because like that's the way that they sometimes are buying into like Eurocentric standards, because our features are not European. There are other African countries who have very similar features like us. They maybe just are not all of them. I don't know how to describe, but it's just wild to me that like that's the thing that they lean into. Like of all of the things that are fucking cool about being where we're from, about being from where we're from, that's what you're clinging on to. Like, wow, I'm fair-skinned, have big eyes, and soft hair. I know that there were times when people would be like, you don't look Eritrean. And I'll be like, I truly actually do, and that's insane that you said that. The only reason you're saying that is because of this thing.
Again, what I was saying in the very beginning about the dual, like, I guess, how do you say? The double-edged sword. Mm-hmm. There's also the fact that, like, there is something special about looking at someone and being able to clock them as from the same place as you.
Yeah, to like use the myth as a way to find community. No, I don't disagree, because even looking at like the Benyammer boy, right? Like he's not necessarily somebody who you would see and be like, that is somebody who's an Eritrean. However, that person very much died for our country. The tropes that kind of come with that term, I don't necessarily always align with, but I also sometimes still see its value for some people, and that's why I think the only people who should decide whether or not they want to use it anymore are those people.
Like, do you seek to change these things, or do you feel like it's something you've accepted as part of the culture? Or, like, have you seen progress in any way?
I think I seek to change these things. Progress is really hard to gauge in our community, particularly when we're within the diaspora, because there is very much sometimes these, like, instances of, like, they'll be like, oh, she's really Americanized. And it's like, well, that's okay. So if they think that that's why I'm like this, not because this has also just always been who I am, or not that because there's also people like this back home, like that's why these are my views and thoughts, then is that really change, or is that just kind of more like adapting to someone because you value the fact that they come from your community at all? Because I think I have these conversations very often, and they're like, oh, there she is, like the liberal, like the justice girl, ha ha ha. And it's like funny, but yeah, I think how do you gauge whether or not there's actual change when you can't necessarily see them implement this in real time? Like we're not doing studies on this. The only thing that's actually really tough about my identity isn't necessarily me not feeling like an African woman so much as it is like being a queer woman. I think that people then challenge my African identity very aggressively. I think there's just like a lot of Africans, both in the diaspora and back home, who just feel like queerness is like this like white import, which is of course not true. Like in many cultures across the continent, there's like different variations of like how queerness could manifest itself, and like gender expression can manifest itself that are documented. I know some people are like, being a Black African feels like a redundant term. I don't like it. And I think sometimes the reason why I still very much will say things like that, like as a Black African, is because of places like South Africa, places like Zimbabwe, like Tanzania, you know, where they made themselves very comfortable, integrated, regardless of whether or not that integration is like desired.
Going back to the light skins of Africa, can you please explain how you feel when people ask you about When people ask you about Eritreans and Ethiopians having Eurocentric features.
I think it is just like a little bit wild to me because you'll see like these same features just like paired up in different ways. I don't know how to describe it, but like literally most Africans have, most sub-Saharan Africans have like huge foreheads. Like that is truly a trait that we all carry. And yet like it's this thing that's kind of become like very like synonymous with us. Or the fact that we have like big eyes. I would say a lot of like, I don't know, I would say like a lot of like Central Africans, like Cameroonians, like people from the Congo, oh my god, just like us. I just think the difference is maybe they're just like paired up with other features, and so to me it's like odd that these are seen as Eurocentric features because I don't know, I feel like I look like a lot of other black Africans I know in different ways. I would say there's other Africans who are light skinned. I think if you're talking about the ones who are almost like fair skinned, I would say they're not wrong. Like I just don't necessarily think it's like the features that make them Eurocentric. I think it's the fact that those features are paired with light skin maybe. Like that's literally how texturism and colorism works, is that like, let's say you have like a white biracial, right? They might still very much have like similar features to like their black parent, but because they have this like soft hair, because they have this like light white skin, they get to navigate the world as white. That's just like an objective thing.
What is a quote unquote white biracial?
Like a biracial person who can pass for white. Like
Zendaya, I guess.
Yeah, I think she's even talked about it, right? Where like she's had access to a lot of different types of roles because they think of her as the acceptable kind of black. But it's not like the features themselves are actually Eurocentric. I think the thing that makes it Eurocentric is the fair skin of it. Like that's what's making people clock this thing, right? Even with like Rachel Dolezal, she knew the thing that she needed to change was to make her skin darker and change her hair, and then people would be more willing to suddenly visualize her as a black woman.
Right. Like from Egypt to Mozambique, you'll find someone that looks similar to us because of the mixed nature of the coast. I don't think it's up to any of those people, but specifically obviously in this case, people that look like that prototype to then like justify their Africanness, because it's getting into kind of like the percentage like like Eritrea is on the African continent, therefore they're African. In terms of like the double-edged sword in this conversation, I think there's the very real conversation that needs to be had about like the racism that exists within our community, anti-blackness, xenophobia, but then at the same time like I will never have to, like, I'm never going to put myself in a position to justify my Africanness or my blackness to someone as well. And I think that's an interesting conversation because it's like, if people tell us we're mixed, some Ethiopians, like, I've talked to some who are just like, I don't even want to hear that ish, like, you know, whatever.
I don't. Past that, I don't care.
Can you explain?
Because I think it's just Arab washing. Like, I've also seen this with people who are like North African, where they're like, yes, to an extent I identify as Arab, but like, I very much identify as like Moroccan or Algerian, especially because there's like indigenous groups there that like, yes, are Muslim, but are not Arab. And like, you saw this even with the World Cup. I remember there was this one girl on TikTok. Oh, they ate her up. She straight up was just like, black people are so desperately clinging to Morocco, like going into this like stage of the game. It was like during that whole bit, right? Then a girl who quite literally was Moroccan was like, and that's why you sound fucking stupid, because we do not even identify as Arab. This is literally a result of like a different type of colonization, and you don't want to view yourself as a colonizer. There are people who are indigenous here that are Afro-indigenous and are like also indigenous and look like us. Like, it was just crazy. I think sometimes there are times where I'm just like, what are you pulling at? Like, this narrative that like I am not a black person because of a form of colonization that happened previously, does that mean that like Trevor Noah, yes, in his country he would be considered colored, but like, does that mean Trevor Noah here is not considered black? Like, I don't like make sense of it. You're talking about things that also have like very different like cultural relative understandings of race, but I think here we all have the same fucking one. Because that's also the context we're talking about, right? Like, it very clearly seems like we're talking about that in the context of like race within our understanding of like Black American identity. We also have like a very clear understanding of things like the one drop rule and like the fact that like you have very many different types of Black Americans due to what happened within slavery, but those are all very much Black people.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you have any other last thoughts or what you're thinking now that we've had this conversation?
I think something I'm always kind of thinking about is like ways to have like just that like sometimes you will hear other countries like talk about when they experience racism here, like other like African, like sub-Saharan African people. But like Eritreans, I can't speak for Ethiopians, but I know that a lot of me and my friends were all taught like it doesn't matter if you experience racism here, like kind of almost like the immigrant tax. But also a thing that we also were very much taught was like it does not matter because we are not of these people. Like, they do not care about you. They're not going to support you. You know who's going to support you? Your community. It's just like Eritreans' opinions of you that matter. I think that was really significant because it very much like taught me mentally. Like when people had like wild shit to say, like, okay, and what do you offer me? What do you offer my family? Nothing. Racism, I think here to me was like a byproduct of my being able to live here. And I think that's like what we're taught in a lot of ways. And also like, it doesn't matter. Like, these are not people you have to interact with, because I think when they came here, they thought that our community would remain insular.
Right.
And I think as every community learns once they come here, like, you're going to interact with the community around you. Your children are going to be very different from you. And then, like, their children are going to be different from them, right? Like, over time, if there's not, like, a very strong, rooted community, sometimes people don't really fall in line with all of the same values. And so for them, they're just like, well, if we're constantly surrounding them with other Eritreans, like, the racism and things like that they experience won't matter because they're going to have other people who validate them.
That's so true.
I also think about, like, some of the women who have found popularity within Habesha identity. Sorry to interrupt.
Such as?
Like, Kelela and Mereba. Like, they're both dark-skinned women, or at least, like, dark-skinned within our community. They very much go for, like, counterculture types of music styles. Like, they are not trying to be, like, pop girls. They're not trying to be, like, Beyonce's or Destiny's Childs. Like, they went to a very different music scene because I think that's also where they found themselves probably being valued more. But that also is my perception. That could very much be projection. I get that.
That's interesting. I don't know if I ever thought of Kelela as dark skin.
Really?
Yeah. Or even like consciously Mereba. Like now that I think about it, I'm like, she is darker, but I feel like both of them just look so. And this is kind of also that double-edged sword of like, obviously no one's colorblind, but I think like operating in US society, when you see someone from your community, like my first thought isn't, that's a dark-skinned Ethiopian. And I'm like,
that's for me, it is, absolutely.
Really?
Every time. When I see light-skinned Eritrean girls, I'm just like, I don't know if I want to talk to them. I don't know how it's going to be. Like, I think a lot of times I'm very like on edge because I'm wondering like how they're going to perceive or treat me.
How have you been treated with like light-skinned Eritrean girls?
Like in the past?
Yeah. Because like clearly it seems like there's an incident that made you feel apprehensive.
I would say more like...
Or pattern behavior.
Yeah, like an arc, like a pattern behavior, right? Like basically like always see me in relation to like maybe like a couple friends of mine who I'm very close to that are Habesha but are also light skinned, and they would just be like, well, Salin, like, don't you want to be pretty like so and so? Like don't go in the sun too much, things like that. And it was like I was never gonna be able to look like those girls.
So this is like adults telling you that as you're growing up. Okay.
It was like I was never gonna look like those girls. Like they're clearly fairer than I am. They have very different hair than I do. And they've never said those things to me, but it's this thing that is like very permeable. And then I think just generally many brown skin and dark skin women experience like references from like people they're dating. I remember once a boyfriend literally said like, yeah, like I was really surprised when I found out that you were Eritrean because you and a mutual friend of ours like don't look alike. My mom would have definitely said you got like nigga hair. And I was like, I am black, so as are you. Like this was a black man. Sometimes it's also just a matter of like who respects you up front and then what women have to like earn respect, at least within our community. Like sometimes diaspora kids will hear those things and be like, or will be like, you know that they're just like old school, like they're old fashioned girl. They're never gonna defend you. They're never gonna, like they don't step up and say like, this is messed up to the people who say it. These mothers were not being like, you ugly, you know what I mean? Like they were just like, Salim, like you need to stay out of the sun, like, you know, like look at da-da-da, it's because she like watches herself, like, you know, stuff like that.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's important for people to hear that like not everyone filters our community through the same eyes. What else in media? I think even the jebana as a sign of our culture is very interesting.
Yeah, because we had different jebanas. Ours is literally like very like rural, like you could tell we were like some farm girls, you know what I'm saying? For real! We cook it, it comes out the top, that's how we know it's done. For them, they have like a little kettle spout. I don't know. A cultural factor that I truly feel like I've seen is that like some Ethiopians, like maybe this is also just the ones from like Addis, I don't know, but they can be like very like prim, proper kind of, so to speak. And a lot of like Eritreans, like, I'm not saying that they're not that, but even if it's in conversation and dialogue, we do not back down. Like, we are very much like knuck if you buck. I think that is interesting because I've like seen it where people will like, they'll know I'm Habesha and they'll be like, "You're Eritrean, right?" And I'll be like, "Yeah," and they'll be like, "Yeah, I can tell." And that's from other Africans.
Because people know us now for a reason. We collectively growing up, our family was like,
"You don't let nobody bully you."
Like, even within my family, I'm considered darker skin, and like my family will always say korchach.
Which is crazy! Korchach used to be the word that made me want to fight. I'd be like, say it again. Call me nappy again.
I think it's just like, that's part of the like dissatisfaction that comes with this word, because I think it's a word that like not many people feel like they fit the true mold of. And also people feel like, to your point, like they have the power and influence to tell people who looks and doesn't look Habesha, when it's like the conversation can go in a circle because there is a way that is being perpetrated in the media, there is a stereotype, there's a prototype, but then like when you actually look at your family and your friends, like who do you see?
Know it looks different. That's the thing that is such a gap.
Exactly, there you go.
Know, you literally have sisters who look different. You have cousins who look different. Cousins who have like grown up in your house. Literally in my apartment last year, I lived with two other Eritrean girls. We were vastly different. One of us had like hair that was quite literally like yes, curly, but they were like ringlets. It was this thing where she was like, yeah, like it is weird because people say I don't have black hair. And she was like, both of my parents are black, my entire lineage is black. I am where black came from. Like that was the thing that she had said. Yeah, I definitely understand that, like that sense of challenging, because the people who also told her that were also Black Americans, not Habesha people. Nuance.
Do you feel like this conversation, how do you feel about it?
I feel good about it. I think that there's definitely some things where like I feel like I would get eaten up in the comments. Like there would be like, bitch, you basically called us pick-me's, and like, you know what I mean? Like I wouldn't say that I'm somebody who like is always perfectly aligned with some folks in our community. Like I think sometimes they would see me as like, what's wrong with transitioning to the diaspora?
In what way?
Like I feel like they're like this, she's like our fear of like what happens to Habesha girls who live in Europe, in America, in Australia, etc. In the way that I'm queer, in the way that I very much identify with certain things that are not necessarily always seen as culturally ours, even if they actually are, right? Like very loud, very aggressive, outspoken. A lot of women in our culture are like that in a way that I do not think is bad. But they'll very much say like, oh, like it's because she like grew up in America and they feel like they don't realize like how women are supposed to be. And it's like, nigga, you have no idea that your wife runs your household. You thinking you run your household is an illusion.
Do you feel like connected to the Orthodox Church still?
I mean, I had a very different experience than a lot of people too, because my dad, he was the head of the household. So we went to a Lutheran church. I went to a Lutheran school, but like it was also very crazy because my mom was an Orthodox woman. She very much took us, like we all the Habesha events were Orthodox church stuff. Like we celebrate Gottes Johannes. We have Christmas on the 7th. I don't know, I don't really identify as much with being Lutheran. I think I identify more with being Orthodox. Just I think culturally that is a lot of my experience.